This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work responding to another Ask Prof. Wolff question from our very valued Patreon community. This question comes from Marcus Allen, and it asks very straightforwardly, how might we understand a socialist economy, one that was based on worker co-ops as the basic organization of production, the way we internally organized offices, factories, and stores? How would such an economy relate to capital? All these enterprises, worker co-ops in this case, need capital to start, to grow, to manage their day-to-day and year-to-year activities. And how would that be organized? And what would the resulting organization do to the worker co-op organization of the workplace in the factory, the office, and the store? So let me begin by making clear that we have to keep two things separate. One, how you organize the workplace. And number two, how you acquire the capital, the money, that is part of what a functioning workplace needs. So, for example, in capitalism, it is one matter how you organize your enterprise, and then you have a variety of alternative options for how to get the capital to start, to develop, to grow, and so on. And if you're familiar with capitalism, you know that, for example, you can go to a bank and borrow and make a loan, or you can issue shares of stock that people buy, and you acquire the capital when they buy the share of stock. But of course, the share of stock then entitles them to vote on the questions that come up at the annual meeting of shareholders, because they're technically the owners of the company because they own the shares of stock. Well, now let's turn to a worker co-op. It could do the same thing. In other words, we might have an economic system in which worker co-ops go to a bank or issue shares of stock or even find yet other ways of raising money. They could do that separate from how they run their business. For example, when a bank lends money to a corporation, in most cases, it doesn't want to know more about running that business than to know that it's reasonably secure that their loan will be repaid and the interest as well. Shareholders can be a bit more involved. Depends usually on them. Many aren't, some are. Usually the bigger the share block that you own, the more likely you are to be interested for fairly obvious reasons. But still, the running of the corporation is a separate matter. There can be overlap in the sense that the people who provide capital may want to and be able to become involved in more and more of the activities. They certainly have the leverage that comes from ownership. But you can see very clear examples of when there isn't much involvement, when you have what are called ESOPs, employee stock ownership plan enterprises. And that's a situation where the workers together buy the company that they're working in, for example, become the shareholders, but they don't want to be involved in running the enterprise beyond that. They'd like to get dividends as shareholders. They'd like the value of their shares to rise. And so they give the management of the company, the running of it, to a very traditional board of directors. They're the shareholders, so they elect them, but the board of directors runs the company and doesn't do it all that differently in many cases than a private board of directors would have, or maybe earlier did, in fact, run that company. And it can be the same with worker co-ops. We could even have a rule in a worker co-op based socialism that whoever provides the capital does so admitting and accepting that they will have no role in changing what that company does. They are providing capital. They may get either an interest rate if it's a loan or a dividend if it's a share of the profits, but that's all. That will give them no authority, the law could be written that way, to do anything about the worker co-op nature of the enterprise. The workers will still be both the employer, their own board of directors, and the employees, and the providers of capital will be kept at a distance. But there's another way to look at this in the longer run. Presumably a worker co-op based economy will be distributing the profits, the gains, the revenues any enterprise earns in a radically different way, much, much less inequality. In other words, the profits will be distributed to the workers in better salaries, to the local communities to build a good relationship between enterprises and communities. And it will not be given in billion-dollar packages to a handful of people the way modern American capitalism, for example, routinely does. So, for example, we may develop a much less unequal system in which the profits, beside being used to help average people, workers, community residents, and so on, will be put into funds that will be administered democratically by, say, elected representatives of both the industries, the enterprises, and the residential communities in an area. And they will together decide what to do with those capital accumulations, who to lend it to, what enterprises to fund. In other words, we stop having what the question presumes, which is a relatively small number of people with a lot of capital and a relatively large number of enterprises coming to beg for that capital. We may reorganize all of that because of its fundamentally inconsistent commitment to democracy compared to what worker co-ops are all about. Then the whole reorganization of the enterprise would be followed by a reorganization of capital markets, where surpluses and profits go, who presides over their distribution, and what the criteria are for distributing capital among the enterprises that would like to get some to develop or to grow. That would be the socialization of the capital markets, and that should be part of the longer process of developing the socialist follow to the decline of capitalism. If this kind of question and answer is something you think can help shape the conversations about politics and our collective future here in the United States and beyond, then we ask you to partner with us. It's extremely important. Share this video. Send it to friends, associates, family members, whoever you think might be stimulated to think in new and different ways about the problems of a society that needs all the help it can get, not just to prosper and to progress, but to survive. And if along the way we can provide you with more information, remember our website, democracyatwork.info, is the portal to all of the books and videos and interviews that we produce and put up there all the time. That's how you can find out how best to partner with us and what all the different ways are. And if along the way you can provide some financial help, believe me, we will appreciate that as well. Thank you for your attention.